Welcome back to the channel, buddy, and I hope you're doing fine. So, it's been a while since I uploaded here. Let's talk about that for a minute. As always, timestamps in the description below if you don't care about this. And to cut long story short, it's just lack of time. I hope I can change this for 2025. I have a few goals that I want to achieve with this channel. We're gonna participate in a few more competitions. For example, Army on Parade 2025, which might slip into Army on Parade 2026. Just keep in mind that this is just a channel where a dude tries to share a little bit of his hobby, and I'm not doing this as a living. But yeah, still lame that I didn't upload in months, and I feel bad about that. So I hope that the roadmap for 2025 that I created, and we'll talk about that in a different video, will hopefully solve this issue. With that, let's go back to the topic. We're gonna paint today the Chaos Lord on Karkadrak. So we're gonna be again in Age of Sigmar. The theme is gonna be NURGLE. So we're gonna paint our guy Sigvald Green, and we actually gonna sculpt a little bit of infestation and maggots and stuff like that on the mini. And I hope it's gonna look good. The final thing before we start, good news. Channel is alive again. Bad news is the recording is very old and it's from a time where my lighting setup was not ideal. So this is an example from the footage that you're gonna see today. And as you can see, a little bit too much light, I would say. In the post-editing, I was able to fix it a little bit, but it's still not great. Now, this is the footage that you will hopefully see every time in the new videos. So I would say that is a sick improvement, and it's getting really close to the people who have like years of experience with that. First things first though, we assembled the mini. I'm gonna skip that honestly because I made a video about that already, and that's basically exactly what I did, and I don't want to waste your time. So you can check out that video, link in the description and also in the pinned comment. On top of that, all the paints that I'm gonna use in today's video will be listed there too. So let's jump into the video where we have the preparation before we do all the painting.
Okay, and here we go, fully assembled. I will probably lift him from the base later. There are a few tiny gaps here and there, but I'm not too concerned about that for now. I can reach all the areas, even the belly, since the Karkadrak is not on the big base yet. Always keep in mind that brush accessibility should be considered while assembling your minis. Only right here at the base I have 2 connection points, but that should be enough. Then let's have a look at the Lord himself. So the only thing missing is the head, because otherwise painting the neck area can be really frustrating. And as you can see, I can still reach everything pretty nicely, even under the cape. And then the head, pinned it on this little base here. I went with the armor variant because I think it looks a little bit better. Now let's make the thing nurgly. So I have here a hand drill with 1mm, 0.5 mm, and a really, I hope you can even see that, a super tiny bit. And I drill tiny holes. I'm not going through the armor plate. It should just suggest a corrosion effect. Always keep in mind to vary the drill sizes so it looks a little bit more random. You can place single little holes or place a couple of them together as clusters. Next, we're gonna do some modeling and put some texture on the model. You can use green stuff for that. I use Tamiya epoxy putty. Now you don't need much, and I highly suggest that you only take a little bit and then mix the 2-component epoxy before you have too much and will just dry out and be unusable. So as you can see, I really don't take much at the beginning. I just cut 2 small stripes and then mix them together. If you do the rolling that I do, make sure that your mat is clean and there are no tiny bits lying around. So clean it properly, especially when you just assembled and cleaned the mini. Alright, here we go. I have this tiny ball now here of mixed putty, and I cut a tiny piece and then roll tiny balls. Then I take my sculpting tool, dab it into a little bit of water. You can also take Vaseline, both is fine. You need something that prevents the epoxy putty from sticking to your tool. And then I fix these tiny balls on the armor pieces. This takes a while and is a little bit of a fiddly process. I put very slight pressure on the base of the bubbles. And then again, I dab my tool into the water to prevent sticking and push into the middle of the epoxy balls. That way I can mimic pustules. Some of them are still intact and some of them already burst open, granting Daddy Nurgle's gift to everybody around the Chaos Lord. This will take a while honestly, and I even put some of that on the Karkadrak. You can do a little bit extra even and mimic some fungi growing all over the Karkadrak and even the Chaos Lord. I flattened the epoxy, put it on a model, and then sculpture what looks like a fungi infestation. And I decided to even put a few more corrosion spots onto the model. Just don't overdo it, because you also have to paint everything later. Here's the Chaos Lord, and as you can see, I did a variation of blisters and the fungi infestation all over the model. I even placed some of the blisters on the blades, because I want to have a nasty blade at the end, and even the axe head got a little bit of that. I even put a few maggots into the fungi infestation and made it look like some of them popped out of the blisters. And with that, we're ready for painting. I highly suggest trying out some contrast paints. I will tell you later which one I used.
So I'm pretty happy with the preparation. We have like 3 big parts, or like 2 big parts and the head. We will also try to have this on a high level. Well, high level for my standards, let's put it that way. Because we're gonna participate in a competition. It's gonna be in my local games workshop, so nothing too fancy. But still, when we participate, we want to win. Let's see if we can do that. So yeah, nice, assembly is done. We have like 3 parts, that is okay, easy to handle. I would say, let's jump into the painting.
Let's get some paint on our little fella. As a first base coat for the Karkadrak, I will use Ushabti Bone. And I hate myself for that. I thinned down my paint and it took me a long time to get a decent coverage on the dark areas. You can see that one coat is really not doing well. Once that's done, I choose a contrast paint. Plaguebearer Flesh should do nicely to give the model a sickly touch. Also, holy smokes, I need to work on my lighting setup. Okay, not bad, and the best part about it? That was easy as pie. Now I want to bring some definition back. I use Ushabti Bone once more and paint all the areas except the recesses. Not gonna lie, this took way too long. And if you just want to dry brush this step, I won't blame you. However, good luck trying to dry brush the underside of the Karkadrak. Although, who's ever gonna check the underside of the Karkadrak? I needed a break from painting the scales and decided to go for another base coat. I mixed Lead Belcher and Doombull Brown to get a brownish, dirty metallic color. The mix is 1:1. So far, I'm really happy. The Sigvald Yellow from the skin together with the dirty brown metal synergizes pretty nicely in my opinion. I will be lazy here with the shading. Agrax Earthshade works perfectly for the armor panels. Put it everywhere where you want to place some shadows. The only thing you have to avoid is to get pooling in the places where you don't want it. We can fix this with some battle damage later, but it's nice to not be forced when it comes to where you want to place the battle damage. Now you could glaze different metallics on the armor for the edge highlighting, but remember the dry brushing I told you about to save some time? Let's do that. I mix Ironbreaker and Mournfang Brown and then get rid of almost all the paint in my brush by brushing over my dry palette. You can just use a piece of paper towel in case you don't have one. Afterwards I brush gently with almost no paint over the metal parts of the Karkadrak. Don't push too hard when you dry brush. And keep in mind, adding paint is always easier than fixing mistakes. Next, I mix Ironbreaker and Scrag Brown and do the same thing with the sharpest edges of the armor. You don't see much of the effect in recording, but it's there. Just trust me. Here's a quick snip of the mixed colors that I used. Scrag Brown, Mournfang Brown and Doombull Brown all mixed with Ironbreaker. On a model you don't see how different the colors are, since I apply not too much, but on a wet palette you can see that the jump in intensity is quite severe. Here is one side with the Scrag Brown dry brush, and here the one without it. Yeah, not much, but it's there. Then I use my mix of Scrag Brown with Ironbreaker and use a regular brush to edge highlight. Afterwards I mix Ironbreaker with Jokaero Orange for a point highlight. You can see there is again a big jump in brightness with this new mix. I don't apply too many point highlights, but it does help with the readability of the metal. And I think so far we're doing a good job at mimicking something that looks similar to brass or copper, especially for the time invested. Okay, the metal plates are done, let's tackle the ornaments on them. I want to paint them in slightly different colors to contrast them a little bit and give them a bit more attention. Base coat for the ornaments is Balthasar Gold. We quickly shade it with a coat of Reikland Fleshshade. It's my go-to shade for brass and gold. Just avoid pooling and you're good to go. While that dries, I'm working on some battle damage. I rip off a bit of a kitchen sponge and dab it into a bright brown, maybe even orange. Scrag Brown, Jokaero Orange, that works good for brass. For this model I used Squig Orange, because I want to try something out. Then I try to spin the model while gently pushing with the sponge. I do that because I want to avoid repetitive patterns. Once it's done, I connect some of the sponge dots and paint a bit of scratches and chip damage. Try to imagine which parts of the armor would get hit a lot. Edges are a good location to apply chip damage. A shield, for example, is a good spot for scratches. I paint the center of all the battle damage with Rhinox Hide. This is a very simple step, and besides keeping the Rhinox Hide in the Squig Orange, there is not much that you can do wrong. The Reikland Fleshshade is dry by now and I switch to Screaming Bell. I skip the recesses of the ornaments and apply the paint on probably 80% of the Balthasar Gold. I imagine the light coming from above and skip the parts that would naturally be in a shadow. With Brass Scorpion I repeat the process, this time skipping roughly 50% of the parts that I painted with Screaming Bell. Keep in mind the percentage values that I mention are just guidelines and you have to play around with that depending on where on the model you're painting. Sycorax Bronze is covering only a tiny bit of surface area, basically on the areas that are facing the light source directly. Next we do a bit of base coating. I decided to keep the chainmail dark and painted that in Warplock Bronze. The cloth at the side gets a nice Nurgle touch with Deathworld Forest. All the leather parts get a 50-50 mix of Rhinox Hide and Doombull Brown. There are a couple tricky areas to reach because there are a few straps around the Karkadrak, so this takes a bit of time. The bit of fur that we can see gets some Steel Legion drab. Now you could totally shade this with a simple shade, but I wanted to place the shadows in the cloth myself. I used the Deathworld Forest and mixed a tiny bit of Rhinox Hide into it. You can also take Abaddon Black. Then I watered it down to a glaze consistency. I check the consistency on my fingernail and once I'm happy I place it in the folds of the cloth. It's not perfect, but it does the job. I have some time pressure due to the competition deadline in my local games workshop, so I can't get fancy everywhere. But when you compare the shaded area with the base coated area, you can see the difference.
I said already a lot of times in the video, but this is something that I really need to learn for future competitions. Now, you always think, hey, let's paint the areas that nobody sees because it's good practice, right? But I lost a lot of time painting straps on the belly from the Karkadrak that you don't really see that ever. But then I skipped some time on the cloak, like a part that everybody will see and it's a huge surface. Yeah, should probably not do that anymore in the future.
Next I do some simple layering. I use a paint consistency somewhere between a regular layer and a glaze and apply a brighter green. My pick here was Straken Green. Let's see how much a bit of highlighting does to the cloth. Afterwards, a bit of Nurgling Green for the final touch. I use that on the parts that stick out the most. I do the exact same thing with the reins of the Karkadrak. Lots of progress on the mount, but I tend to overdo things while heading towards a deadline. To get a better feeling how much time I will have left for the rest, I decided to shift work on the Chaos Lord. First, some simple base coating. For the armor, I mixed Deathworld Forest together with Lead Belcher. I wanted a metallic green and cover all the armor parts with 2 thin coats. I do the exact same steps for the helmet as well. I shade the armor then with Athonian Camoshade. I went a bit heavy with that, so you might be a bit more careful with that step. For the handle I decided to base coat in Screamer Pink. Pink and purple tones work pretty well with the sickly green. The metallic parts for the weapons and the ornaments get the same treatment as the ornaments on the Karkadrak armor. Balthasar Gold covers that. The chainmail under the arms will get some Warplock Bronze. The coat gets the same leather mix of Rhinox Hide and Doombull Brown. To highlight the armor, I mixed Straken Green together with Iron Breaker. This will do beautifully as an edge highlight for the armor. You could do a ton of fancy glazing, but I didn't have the time for that. With that done, I decided to shade the handle with a contrast paint. We go with something strong here, Sigvald Burgundy will do the trick. I was in a good mood and decided the armor needs a bit more of a pop. I mixed Runefang Steel and Nurgling Green and did another tiny edge highlight. The first edge highlight can run around the whole armor piece that you're painting. The second one you should only do in areas where the light hits the armor. While I don't think you need to glaze a bazillion layers on a model to make it look good, highly competitive and prestigious painting contests aside, edge highlighting is something that I always do, even while doing slab chop. I did try to get the spikes on the Karkadrak spec done with contrast paint, but yeah, I wasn't a fan of the result. I decided to use that specific contrast paint for the pus blisters. Sometimes you need to try something and admit that it didn't work. I will go to a basic bone formula and cover the spikes in some pure Rhinox Hide. I thought the contrast paint would look good due to the recesses, but well. Now great times, I actually had to travel and decided to take the Karkadrak with me and paint the bone parts. I brought my camera with me and everything, and as you can see, I had glorious lighting setup with me. And I decided to toss the whole recording in the trash. When it comes to making a video of this guy, he seems to be cursed. The formula for paints that I use is heavily inspired to the one that GW uses. Base coat is Rhinox Hide, then Mournfang Brown, XV88, Balor Brown, Ushabti Bone, Screaming Skull, pure white. You basically cover less and less of the bone parts and work your way up in layers to pure white. I might do a video just about how I do this. Back to the Chaos Lord. You can see I finished the metal processes that I did on the Karkadrak and I'm kinda pleased. Could be worse. Next we're gonna do the weapons, and the base coat that I picked for that is a simple lead belcher. On the bright areas you have to do 2 thin coats. Then I mix Black Templar and Nuln Oil, so a contrast paint and a shade 1:1. With that we do our shading. Just be careful, broken record mic here, that you don't get any pooling stains. Empty your brush quickly in some water and soak up any excess color. You can see immediately a winning effect. In areas where I want it to be even darker, I do a second coat. After that's dry, I want to paint some rust stains. Nurgle needs some stuff on their blades, can't have them polished and shiny. I start with a coat of Doombull Brown, very thinned down with water. You basically glaze it here. As you can see, at first I load up my brush with way too much paint. Once I'm happy with the intensity and placement, I switch to Scrag Brown and repeat the process, but in a smaller area. At the bottom of the blade I honestly overdid it. The effect is too strong, but I'm too lazy to redo the paint job. After all, what's perfect in the Nurgle army, am I right? And yes, I wouldn't skip the Scrag Brown, because look at the side without it and the side with it. No brainer in my opinion. We push it even further with a tiny bit of Sculpting Orange. I dab a few spots into the Scrag Brown and call it done with the rust effect. You can see that I added the rust effect to the blade as well. How about another effect? I'm gonna do a verdigris paint job. The process is identical to the rust stains. Sotek Green is the first color that we thin down and glaze on the weapon. You can see that my first layer is almost invisible and I have to do a few coats to get to something like this. We follow this up with Sybarite Green and Gauss Blaster Green. The 2 follow-up paints don't need to be thinned down as much as the first one, but honestly it's always easier to add paint than to remove some. Try them thinned down until you get a consistency that you're comfortable with. And as always, don't forget about the edge highlight, so everywhere where there's a clean break in the blades, I paint some Stormhost Silver. When you dab the brush, it will look more battle damaged. When you paint a clean highlight, it will look a bit more pristine. Now, all the corrosion effects are great, but so far we painted just some Nighthound weapons and not Nurgle weapons. Remember the holes that we drilled? We give them a bit of an infection. Sigvald Burgundy comes in clutch and we fill the drilled holes with this paint everywhere. Not just the weapons, don't forget about the armor parts that you drilled too. Once that is dried, we dot some Screamer Pink into the hole. This is a bit difficult for me honestly, because my hand is not stable enough. I tried my best and did actually alright. I always tell myself whenever I make a mistake that people look at the models from half a meter away while you play with them. At the end it's getting even more fiddly because I place a tiny white dot into the Screamer Pink. Yeah, that was fun. Not. The white dot is necessary though, because we place some Doomfire Magenta on top of it. The white underneath gives the Doomfire a chance to glow. But something is off. I try to give the whole thing a vibe as if the infection is eating away at the metal. So I glazed Screamer Pink towards the drilled holes. You do this until you build a purple tint around the infection. It's a subtle effect and the current lighting setup can't properly show it. I'm happy that I was able to fix the lighting for future videos, but it's still a shame I can't show you the outcome accurately. You can experiment with other colors. I also used some Volupus Pink, I also used some striking Scorpion Green. Depending on the combinations you pick, you can build up a necrosis effect. With that, I will put the weapons and drilled holes away for now. The modeled fungus and blisters need some paint too. I base coat all of it with Flayed One Flesh. I want it to be bright so the contrast paint can work with it. Afterwards, I will use the contrast paint Nazdreg Yellow for the infestation parts. And I was super satisfied with the outcome. And on top of that, it's easy to do. And since we kept the armor parts dark brown and green, nobody will see it if you slip a bit with your brush, so you can work quickly through the step without being super tiny. Then I repeat the process that we did for the inside of the drilled holes and the pus blisters that burst open. Afterwards we apply another coat of Flayed One Flesh on the outside and skip all the recesses. As the edge highlight I picked Pallid Witch Flesh. And done. In combination with the corrosion I am really content with how everything turned out. For the fur around the neck we will use Baneblade Brown. A bit of a different brown compared to what we used for the Karkadrak. And hey, what would be a painting video without Agrax Earthshade, am I right? A classic color to shade everything fast. I'm only 2 days away from the deadline, so we have to take a few shortcuts. To clean this mess up, I take Baneblade Brown again and highlight the single strands of hair. And then another smaller highlight with Karak Stone. I used the exact same method for the fur on the saddle for the Karkadrak. We also need to clean up the handle. Back to Screamer Pink to elevate the edges again. The rims that catch the most light get a squick orange highlight. And I think it's a simple method and it works great, especially when we compare the lower half of the handle with the top part that is still missing the last 2 steps. The latter will be one of the last big acts before we get close to the finish line. After base coating we do some shading, and I figured I'd have a bit of time to do a little bit more complex shading. I seriously thinned down some Rhinox Hide with Abaddon Black and placed the mix into all the recesses. Afterwards I use some Doombull Brown to edge highlight. Easy to do on the leather straps. The sharpest edges get some Scrag Brown. On the cloak I glaze the shadows and the Doombull Brown. This takes a bit of practice, which I'm still lacking honestly, to get a good transition between the shadows and the highlighted Doombull areas. You can also try some wet blending to get a good result. The sharpest edges get a Scrag Brown highlight again. Once we're done with this, I paint with the same color some very thin scratches around the Scrag Brown highlights to give the cloak some texture. You will probably not nail this on your first try, because you must develop a feeling how scratches naturally form on the cloak. I did this now for a couple and can still only achieve mediocre results. Now we have here a draw the rest of the fucking oil moment, but I honestly had only 11 hours left and couldn't record making the base. Which I'm pretty sad about, because a base is super important and it really boosts how good your model looks at the end. I also finished the highlighting on all the scales of the Karkadrak, a step that I hopefully will never have to do in my life again. Since I was literally hours away from the deadline, I didn't repaint the cloak, although I really wasn't happy with that one. If you want to push this even further, you can place more scratches randomly on the big surfaces of the cloak. And for an even sharper highlight, I added some Karak Stone highlights. Also, you can see that I finished all the bone parts on the helmet and the shoulder spikes. I still have a Balor to paint, so maybe I make a video about him and show you how I do the bone parts over there. To be real with you for a moment, the cloak result triggered me a little bit. It's a part that a lot of people will see. Nobody cares about the highlighted leather straps on the belly, but the damn cloak blowing in the wind, yeah, that would have been a bit more important. I blend everything together with a glaze of Doombull Brown and Rhinox Hide. And I highly recommend using a bigger brush here to avoid any paintbrush streaks. So we have one more painful job to do, and that is painting the face and the helmet. Yep, you guessed it already, I have some masochistic tendencies. Reikland Flesh for base coat, then I used Reikland Fleshshade for the shading. Afterwards I used Rhinox Hide for the eye sockets and placed some white ink into the Rhinox Hide. And no, I didn't record that, because F me, I have no idea how to paint that and record at the same time. And once that's done, we put in a black pupil. Fun times. I also forgot the chainmail, so let's put 2 highlights on that. Sycorax Bronze and Hashed Copper will do the trick. And the final hours before the deadline, I even found a bit of time to put a Flayed One Flesh highlight on the upper scales. And with that, I'd say we have a look at the finished Chaos Lord on Karkadrak.
And that's it, honestly, for the time invested. I'm pretty happy how my little boy turned out here. And now you probably are wondering, well, Mike, what was the ranking? And I'm happy to tell you that we made actually first place with this one. A few things that annoy me is that I couldn't show you how to do the base, because base is definitely like 50% of the model. Although it takes a fraction of the time normally to do so. Like I did this in, I think, a couple hours with a few 3D printed parts. I'm very happy with the skin tone from the Karkadrak, with the investations. I love the blades. I think the blades look really cool. Maybe I'm gonna make a separate video how to make NURGLE blades from the stuff that I learned the last year and a half. That might be cool. I'm not super happy how the horn and everything turned out. That is just like simple layering at the end because I was running out of time. But yeah, the usual YouTuber begging at the end there. I'm doing this as a hobby. Still, maybe one day we can do a little bit more of this channel, so support would be appreciated. If you have the moment to drop a like, maybe even write something nice. I would like what you think about the Karkadrak. What would you do differently? Go ahead, let me know. I want to read that. Still working on a proper way to make an outro for this channel, because I don't want to have the same format like I have on my main channel. With that, I just want to tell you guys, have a nice start in your week. I'm working now on the next one, and that's gonna be the introduction video for Army on Parade 2025/2026. Alright, stay awesome everybody, and bye bye.